So how much does the human soul weigh? The answer is that it exists outside of our reality and that it's a complexity of higher dimension. My theory is that the complexity of the matter in your brain is so intense that it expands. The matter actually expands into higher dimension, which is like, this is where it starts to be theoretical and just my brain nonsense trying to come up with brain explanation nonsense. Hello. How much does the soul weigh? An old experiment was once done to measure the weight of the soul. It was a scientist named Dr. Duncan McDougall. It's an old experiment. He measured a human body the moment that it died and saw that the human body decreased in weight about 3/4 of an ounce the moment of death, or 21 grams. So that is where the popular theory, or it's not theory, it's been proven wrong. That's where the popular idea that this human soul weighs 21 grams originated from. This has been proven false. I read a book about it at some point, but basically all of the weight that dissipates at the moment of death can be explained by certain things, mostly gases in the body being expelled or the conditions changing. So how much does the soul weigh? I think in the book I read, it talked about further experiments and how there was a tiny minuscule amount of matter that was hard to explain why it was gone the moment a human died. But it was so small that it could be error easily. So does the human soul actually weigh anything? I don't think it has to. Sentience, I think, exists in the fact that the human brain is large compared to the body. So the human brain is not the biggest brain of animals. A lot of people would assume that the human brain is the biggest because we are the smartest creatures on the planet. But we do not have the biggest brain. I think like whales have bigger brains than us or something. But what humans do have that's unique about our brain size is that if you compare the ratio of the brain to body, then humans have the most significant ratio. In relation to the size of our bodies, our brains are the biggest compared to all the other creatures on this stupid planet. We don't have the biggest brain, but we do have the biggest brain in relation to the size of our bodies. I think that somehow the measurement of sentience must exist and the little bit of extra brain that exists in our head past what's necessary to operate our body. Because brains in animals generally are bigger depending on the size of the creature and the complexity of the creature as well. Whales have huge brains because they have a giant body, and brains operate the whole body. So the brain has to be huge to operate that whole body. But if you look at the ratio for a whale, the brain is tiny compared to the size of the whale. So it's significant in size to operate a lot of functions, but it is not any larger than it needs to be. The only creature that's really larger than it needs to be for the brain are humans. Sentience somehow exists in that little bit of brain that exists past what's necessary to operate our bodies. Another thing people say about intelligence is that being more intelligent is actually more related to the wrinkles of the brain rather than the size. So I've been talking about size of the brain, but it's all about the wrinkles, they say. It's about the wrinkles. But size is significant because of the ratio and the consistency of the human ratio being the best for the brain. So somehow in that extra matter, the extra size past what's necessary, in the wrinkliness of the brain, it expands into sentience. I think this brings up the subject of free will. Does it exist? If you're a logical person or a scientist, you might say that every decision you make is based off of some sort of trigger. And you may think you're making a decision, but really the decision you're making is based off of experience. And the decision you make is just going to be the decision you make no matter what. And so, ignoring the vagueness of free will and what sentience really is, I think, logically, the mind, the human brain, is like a computer, and it's a vast intertwining array of triggers based on what's occurring around you and what experiences you have and the biology of the brain itself. And the complexity of these triggers is so intense, so insane that it reaches a level of chaos that cannot be defined. Chaos is something that people talk about in science, especially in like astrophysics, where the numbers are so delicate that you change it a tiny bit and it turns into a completely different scenario, and you can't truly measure what's going to happen. This is the scientific idea of chaos. And I think that's kind of what's happening in our brain. The triggers that are formulated in our brain biologically, but also through experience, are so complicated that it becomes inherently chaotic and difficult to measure. And that's what makes it so unique, makes everybody so unique, makes sentience and free will seem so tangible, even though we don't know what it is and can't explain it. My theory is that the complexity of these triggers and the matter in your brain is so intense that it expands. The matter actually expands into higher dimension, which is like, this is where shit starts to be theoretical and just my brain nonsense trying to come up with brain explanation nonsense. I think the matter of the brain, the part of the brain that defines sentience, isn't measurable, because the part that really defines sentience is the complexity of matter that expands into higher dimension. So dimension, something people have been talking about a lot lately and have theorized a lot and exists in fiction, is the idea of alternate realities. And I think we're at a point where alternate realities are a significant possibility. They have not been proven. It seems, if there has been some stuff recently that has made it seem like it's real, with Google's Willow chip being able to solve some complex problem or gather some weird data in a way that the measurement is inexplicable with a supercomputer. And that the idea is that it's somehow grabbing with quantum computing, it's somehow grabbing data from alternate realities to complete its computation. Everything I looked up says that claim that it's proof of alternate realities is bogus. That, maybe it could be, but there's really no proof of that. But it is a significant possibility that alternate realities exist. So why do I talk about alternate realities in dimension? Well, I think it's interesting because if your brain expands into higher dimension, what does that mean? What is your brain accessing if this is true? Well, I think something fun to talk about is deja vu. There's an interesting theory that I have had and many people have had about the idea that deja vu is a proof of alternate realities. That deja vu is when you are experiencing a moment and you feel like you've experienced it before, but you're pretty certain you actually haven't. Perhaps the memory you're feeling, or the feeling you get that this has happened before, isn't because it's happened to you before, but because it's happened to an alternate reality version of yourself, or it's happening at the same exact time to a version of yourself from an alternate reality, and you're somehow connected and you're feeling like this has happened to you before. I think this is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool theory. I feel like there's legitimacy to it, not in science, but in just like the convenience of it. So who knows? If my theory of the brain were to be correct, then it would make sense that the complexity of the brain expanding into higher dimensions means that it would connect to alternate reality versions of yourself, and that your brain really is connected to other versions of yourself in higher dimension and alternate realities. And maybe what's happening is true sentience is actually coming from connections of your brain to different brains of alternate realities. And that's where the complexity of chaos complexity comes in is that your brain isn't just what's happening here. Your brain is also connected to what's happening in the different realities. And perhaps just like the willow chip, the sentience comes from your brain borrowing calculations from alternate realities, connected to alternate versions of that same brain, that same computer that exists in a different reality. Just like the willow chip. Maybe a human brain is just like the willow chip. That's so cool. Like, I have thought about this for a long time, for a very long time. And I always had this theory that your brain is connected to alternate realities. And then this thing with the willow chip kind of lines up with that. So, AI, quantum computing, that's where sentience is going to come from. That's where the robots are going to take over. Where was I? All right, let's time to get down into another theory. One that I've already been talking about. Alternate realities have to do with higher dimensions. My theory is that a universe is three-dimensional. Our universe is three-dimensional. Are there fourth-dimensional beings? Well, maybe. We don't know. Is there a fourth-dimensional, like a reality that could exist in 4 dimensions that we don't know about? Maybe. We don't know. But I would say probably not, actually. In my opinion, my theory, like a universe, like if we were to scale it down, the comparison here to like in the three-dimensional reality, a universe is a 2-dimensional disk, right, that exists in 3 dimensions. So you could think of it in that way, that a universe is a 3-dimensional disk that exists in 4th-dimensional space, and that alternate realities are almost a stack of disks in 4th-dimensional space and are sort of connected. Or maybe there's just a blob of existence in 4th-dimensional space, or maybe 5th or 6th, and a universe is simply a cross-section of that 4th-dimensional matter. And every cross-section is slightly different, defining a different universe, right? But they're still connected vertically in the 4th-dimensional space. Like our minds expanding from our disk, from our cross-section of our reality into the ones above it, connecting to more information and more data that allows a true chaotic sentience to take place, for an understanding of reality that doesn't make any sense, that we can only explain as a human soul. So if this is the case, which maybe I'm full of shit, maybe it's real. If this is the case, then are we 4th-dimensional human beings? Are we 4th-dimensional beings? I asked if 4th-dimensional creatures exist. Who knows? Maybe, but maybe we already are the 4th-dimensional creatures. We largely exist in 3-dimensional space, but we take advantage in our brains the potential of 4 dimensions. So in our minds, maybe we really are 4th-dimensional creatures. One thing that is certain is that our reality exists in 3 dimensions. Now, there are other ideas that the higher dimensions could be related to time and space, right? Which are kind of, I think, ideas of what higher dimensions could be. But I think they are 3-dimensional understandings of higher dimension. And space seems like it could be higher dimension, simply because we cannot fathom connections in a higher dimension. Sorry, what am I saying? I think that the reason why the universe and reality exists in 3 dimensions is because the 3rd dimension, or about where we are, is the balance point in dimension between complexity and rationality. If you exist in higher than 3 dimensions, as you move higher than 3 dimensions, the rules and the laws of such universes become far too complex and too chaotic for rationality and universe to exist. But as you move lower than 3 dimensions, which is something we can understand a lot better, 2 dimension, 1 dimension, complexity becomes far too limited for a universe to exist. There isn't enough to work with for a universe to function. So our universe exists in the 3rd dimension because the 3rd dimension is the exact right dimension for enough complexity for a universe to function on its own, without it being too complex and too chaos for anything to truly manifest. I think higher dimensions is chaos. And I think that that sentience and the fact that it's so difficult to explain and the complexity of triggers reaches a point of chaos, of true irrationality. That higher dimension, the fourth dimension, is chaos, and that sentience exists in chaos as a form of scientific mathematical chaos that exists in higher dimension. And the ability for reality to exist is the third dimension, and the ability for sentience and life and the human soul exists in the fourth dimension. Maybe the existence, the reality, the ability for reality to exist, for a universe to exist, exists somewhere in between the fourth and third dimension. Mostly third dimension, but a little bit expanding in that fourth dimension. Maybe it's about 3.141596 or whatever pi. No, I'm just kidding. That would be funny if that was the prime number for dimension in existence is 3.14. And that's about where I would put it too, because it's mostly third dimension, a little bit of fourth dimension, That's where I would put it. Maybe about yeah. So how much does the human soul weigh? The answer is that it exists outside of our reality, and that it's a complexity of higher dimension. Okay, I think I said everything. I don't need to say anything else. Anyways, that has been my video about the human soul, about sentience and free will. I hope you enjoyed watching Will talk about free will. I'm sure there's more that I could say, but I just think I'm done now. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to my channel, Overthinking Will Overthinks, where I talk about literally anything. It could be anything. I could talk about anything, and you could watch me talk about it. Why would you want to? Because I'm cool and smart. Why am I... It's so hard. It's so hard to end. I'm done. Like, subscribe. Done. Bye. Bye. Pie.